Hey, everybody, welcome to the Daily Objective and happy Martin Luther King Day. Today, we'll be celebrating the individualism implicit in his famous speech. Paraphrasing from memory, I have a dream that someday my kids who are black can play with kids who are white, and a man will be judged not by the color of his skin, but by the content of his character. And here to discuss with me this holiday, the vision of Martin Luther King, and what's stopping that dream from coming true today, it's Mark Pellegrino.
Right. I got to tell you, Rucka, that was a poetic rendition of that speech, almost as good as the man himself.
Well, now that's a compliment. Now, you look like a young guy. Were you around when Martin Luther King was still alive?
Yeah, well, I was a baby. I was in swaddling clothes at the time of his assassination. So when he was really moving and shaking and making things happen in the world, I wasn't born yet.
So when I started going to public high school in the early 2000s, I remember sensing kind of a disillusionment among the other kids, kind of like, yeah, good luck with that, like referring to his Martin Luther King's vision, because we saw like, largely the white kids would hang out with other white kids, the black kids would hang out with, there was some overlap at times. In some ways, people would gravitate by mutual interest, like the punk rockers would gravitate to each other, and, not all of them were white. So like the chess club, whatever they were, the computer nerds were into, they hung out. But largely we saw people kind of congregating and hanging out with members of their own race. So, and then they would go home and largely live in neighborhoods with people who were of similar skin tone, or however you would describe their race. So there was kind of a sense of disillusionment. And so it doesn't surprise me that when a lot of my contemporaries went off to college and were taught, yeah, Martin Luther King maybe had a nice idea, but, let's be honest, everyone's got their in-group, and, the sociology professors would explain that, yes, we can't help it, we're all part of a group, and we're in a way, we're all oppressing one another and being oppressed by people's kind of biases that they might not even know, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, we've heard the rhetoric. So it's been my impression that like people sort of gave up on the dream of Martin Luther King, and also they were taught like that he was a little bit out of touch as well. What do you have? Does any of that resonate with you, or what's kind of been your experience?
None at all. I mean, look, when I was coming up at a school in Van Nuys, grammar school in Van Nuys, this is a predominantly white, I guess, demographic, but there were quite a few immigrants mixed in with that, and I seem to gravitate towards them as friends. I gravitated towards all the quote unquote outsiders and oddballs. And so I don't really relate to that idea of like sticking with my own and that being sort of a fundamental premise of everybody. It's just the way they automatically go intuitively. My friends were Arab and Hispanic and black and gay, even. This is in a period of time when it wasn't so politically acceptable, to be that way, but they were my friends nonetheless, and they're still my friends to this day. So I don't know about that. I started to experience a sense of political segregation when I applied for college. And I get shit for this all the time on social media because I said I was a victim of affirmative action, because my black and Hispanic friends who were richer than I went to a private school in high school, and I had to work to pay for my own books because my mom didn't make that much money. But everybody, for the most part, who went there, just before they were giving out scholarships, they went there because they had been going to private schools their entire lives. So the black kids and Hispanic kids were much more wealthy than I, and I found them getting into schools that I wanted to get into with lower grades and lower SAT scores than I had. Which made me feel, I guess, probably the way some, black kid might have felt being excluded just for the fact that he was white, even though his skills, or just for the fact that he was black, even though his skill set might have been better than his white companion. So that's when I started to feel the political pressure of this abandonment of the colorblind society. It wasn't so much in the day-to-day living where we integrated with each other, loved each other, played with each other, fought with each other. It was in the political class that was exerting a certain kind of racialized pressure down on us. And I think it's now become mainstream. I think we abandoned it for a bit, and then it's come back with a vengeance.
The like racism has come back with a vengeance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting, by the way. A lot of people supported themselves through college, but it sounds like you actually worked your way through high school, was it? Where you had to pay for your books? Wow.
Yeah.
Now that's something. So yeah, affirmative action has I maybe arguably was like kind of like always like the detail, like the one kind of aspect of the civil rights movement, one of like one of them that like really created a lot of problems while trying to solve many problems. So the answer to racism, on a social level was always individualism, philosophically, and then politically, capitalism ought to have been the antidote. I think I've read a little bit of Frederick Douglass. He's from about 100 years earlier than Martin Luther King. And he wrote an essay. He used the word Negro. He said, like, what should be done with the Negro? Leave him alone. He said, as much as, he's had the odds against him at this point, the best thing you could do now is leave him alone. Just don't stand in his way. Don't let the state stand in his way. And of course, his advice was not taken. The states, especially the southern ones, continue to stand in the way of the blacks, and also northern states as well in some ways. Yeah.
Well, I feel right. I feel that that community, and somebody who knows more can correct me on this, but I feel like the black community was split. There was Frederick Douglass, the self-made man who thought you should just put your nose to the grindstone and eventually you succeed. And Booker T. Washington, I think, felt the same way. And the Tuskegee Institute was about training people to be viable, self-sufficient individuals within the culture that they were, and that they understood that, generations rise, even if the current one isn't, if they are left alone. And then there was the W.E.B. Du Bois version that had a completely different orientation, which was about the acquisition of political power. And once you acquire political power, then that trickles down to the lowest folks in the economic realm. That has not proven to be the case. I think blacks have a tremendous amount of political power at the moment, even their own caucus, and they're the heads of cities and the law enforcement agencies across the country, and yet that has not translated to benefits at the lowest economic realm for black people. Where I think the Frederick Douglass self-made man phenomenon, the idea of learning a skill and becoming a viable independent being, really was having a great effect.
Mm-hmm. By the way, people think I'm uneducated because I pronounce W.E.B. Du Bois that way, Du Bois, and
Du Bois.
I think he specifically pronounced it Du Bois the way, phonetically, but it looks French, so people go, no, it's Du Bois, and then anyway, I don't always have time to explain to them that. But yeah, like it seems like there was always like these competing factions going all the way back to the 19th century. And, Frederick Douglass named himself Douglass. That's not his birth name. I think when he escaped from slavery, he named himself Frederick Douglass, or at least changed his last name to Douglas, named after a Scottish poem. Isn't that pretty amazing? You don't see a lot of, like black guys naming themselves after a Scottish poem. I think it's the Scottish Enlightenment that was affecting somebody with the free soul of Frederick, and he saw like there's his culture, there's his those are his values, and so you could sort of the way I see it, you can kind of see the Enlightenment like or the final traces of it around the mid 19th century, and jump over 100 years later, and you've got, once again, sadly, blacks need to fight for equal rights. And when they go to school, what are they being taught? Enlightenment values? Hardly. At this point, they're getting socialism, all types of anti-rational, anti-individualist, anti-capitalist philosophical ideas. And you kind of see that present in the civil rights movement in the 1960s. So yeah, I guess like Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech is kind of like the last of the individualistic sort of sentiment in the culture, even though MLK himself was very mixed in his views. Like a lot of his stuff, I think we would agree with. A lot of it, maybe we would say is, is not perfect. And he was standing against other civil rights people who were much more collectivistic, and they were really ready to galvanize along racial lines and be like Pan-Africanists and stuff like that.
And I somewhat understand that sensibility when you feel like a country has a certain stated principles and yet it denies them entirely with respect to you. It could easily make you cynical and desire to abandon those for something that offers the possibility of something better. And socialism, Marxism in general, has stood in that paradox, that American paradox, as a possible way, as an equalizer. It never is, of course, in reality, but it certainly offers that in ideal.
Yeah, yeah. Razi said something before we went live. He was on the call, and it sounded like he was saying, when you're only focused on the negative, like when you're only focused on fighting something, you end up aligning yourself with all types of mishigasim. So like if you're opposed to the racist institution, then you might reject capitalism along with the rest of America, because you see America as one big force for racism against yourself. So it's very important to be clear on what are you for. So it would have been wonderful if the effort to free the blacks and to earn, to respect their equal rights, their rights under the law, would have been understood to be the fight for capitalism, the fight for objectivity and, reason and all of that.
Well, unfortunately, all these great movements, these great revolutions, intellectual progress comes into a world already made and already subject to, bad thinking, bad ingrained rules of behavior, laws, and philosophies, and it's a struggle to overcome those things. The American Revolution started long before 1776. The ideas were starting to germinate, and then the revolution happened. The Second American Revolution, I think, was justifiably the Civil War, where there was an attempt to actually concretize the sentiments and ideals in the Declaration of Independence. That revolution still happened in a culture trying to cling to feudalism and aristocracy and the ancient regime, still trying to maintain its power. And so there was a third American Revolution in the form of civil rights, which was contaminated, I think, by generations of this notion of what rights mean, the inflation of rights from the progressive era on, so that third revolution became a very mixed thing, from not just liberating people even further from social oppression, but miring them in social, political, and moral ideals that are just as shackling or lead to some worse things down the road.
Yes. So I guess we can jump past the 60s and jump to present day. So something like 5-6 years ago, the whole social justice rhetoric became very mainstream. I think it was in the universities maybe for 50 years earlier or so, maybe longer than that. But it became very mainstream with the internet and with just, the passage of time and some professors retiring and new ones filling their place. It became very, very mainstream. Like people became very familiar with the rhetoric, and this social justice worldview, I think, tends to say, if I could try to summarize it, that like most philosophies, they don't believe objectivity is really possible. So you're assigned a certain identity when you're born along racial lines or your sexual preference or whatever it is, that this now affects how you see the world, and you also are oppressed by people who see you that way. And in some ways, you're oppressing your fellows by the way you see them. And so if there is a solution, there certainly are instructions on how to alleviate the problem. I'm not sure if it can ever be solved, but they basically say you need to, quote, educate yourself, ask, what can I do to be a good ally? What can I do to make up for all of my sins? And but certainly someone like Martin Luther King saying, I want everyone to be treated as an individual, content of their character, etc. That whole thing is passe, I think, in the views of the latest generation of leftist, social justice activists. So do you basically see my summary as accurate in your experience?
Yeah, I don't think they see individuals. I think they see groups, pockets of people who are determined by their race, their economic class, and their orientation, physical and moral orientation on some in some power hierarchy. Nowhere in that formula for society is there an individual with free will who can command his own soul and make his own choices. It's all influenced from the outside and must be redirected from the outside with somebody who has a wide vision of how to distribute everything so that it's equitable to everyone. And it's a degrading, dehumanizing, pessimistic, irrational point of view that is now dominant. I mean, I'm sure it was in its nascent form 40, 50 years ago, but with social media, it spread like a virus into our lexicon. It's in what we say, it's in how we view each other, it's in the cautious way that you approach people, because you've sort of internalized these power dynamics that aren't necessarily true, but they've become true to you because you've been told it so many times.
Yeah, it does seem to be everywhere. It did sweep like wildfire. That's a good metaphor. So that's where we're at. Today's, self-described anti-racists, I think, largely reject what Martin Luther King spoke about in the memorable, the part of that speech that most people are familiar with. So did you ever think in your life, when the first time you heard Martin Luther King say that, did you ever think you would be one of a handful of people left in the world who's advocating for individualism in that spirit, like just purely uncompromisingly so? Because it just seems like it's just completely passe anywhere you look. There's virtually nobody advocating for actual individualism, actually saying content of character and inalienable rights.
Well, some in the conservative world are paying lip service to aspects of individualism, but of course their own moral alignment is so paradoxical and self-detonating that it doesn't really matter that they're paying lip service to individualism. No, I actually thought individualism is self-evident in a sense, not in the sense that it's automatically apparent, but when you think beyond a level or two, sink down a level or two into the concept, it's clear that it's a superior way to view people. And the other side is self-detonating at almost every level. So I wouldn't think that the mass of folks would accept the self-detonating ideas over the ones that are so clearly supported by observable facts and reality, but that's the case.
Yeah. So I tend to say, and this is kind of in the spirit of this network, it's altruism that's kind of altruism is always in the next room doing push-ups. There's a metaphor I've heard referring to addiction, but I'll use it here broadly, referring to ethics, like altruism. Anytime it seems like the culture is getting sort of individualistic and prosperous, and people are kind of implicitly embracing egoism and taking on the world, but altruism is always there waiting for a chance to step back in. And we can see that at the end of the day, people who push back against racism and say like, hey, come on, everybody's a person, everybody's an individual, at a certain point, they're kind of pushed into a corner where they need to admit, yeah, well, but pure individualism is selfish, isn't it? I mean, we can't be selfish. We can't have individuals really be free and entirely selfish. We need to have some altruism, right? And next thing you know, that moral premise dilutes everything.
Yeah, altruism is definitely the big bad in the room. It's the elephant that nobody wants to acknowledge. But the 400-pound gorilla that's helping altruism is radical skepticism. As I've said, I think it's a cancer. It's a moral cancer because it undoes people's capacity to think or know the truth, or even to think that the truth is possible or that certainty is possible. Some of those most educated people I know are asking for a virtue of open-mindedness, meaning uncertainty, in constant uncertainty, as an expression of being the ultimate rational person. And I think that's what's allowed more and more poison to seep in, right? If you don't have confidence in your mind, if anything out there is possible, if you have no concept of certainty or consider certainty to be parochial, that undoes your sense of, it undoes your individual sense of judgment, and you are naturally going to reach for others for answers instead of reality in your own mind.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. So no debate today about skepticism being a cancer. Jonathan Honig with 99 cents. Thank you for that. And Marilyn with $5 says, Debbie Gate got me interested in Frederick Douglass with an excellent Ocon lecture she gave. I don't know if it's still available. And it looks like Robert in the regular chat is saying it is available at the ARI store. So anyone interested in Frederick Douglass might want to check that out. It's inspiring, it's inspiring seeing people in history. They had so much less evidence than like we do today of like what liberty can bring about and just how much an individual can accomplish on this earth. Like they were like living like cavemen compared to us. And still the idea of first-handedly taking on the world is, it was there and it inspired them enough to write about it and to act on it. So the better elements of the Enlightenment were not skeptic. They were looking at the world and asking, how do we do that? Like, how do we deal with this thing? How can I, the individual, make the best of this? And that's what, I think Debbie's husband, Onkar, has described Ayn Rand, paraphrasing from memory. Rand was the philosopher that the Enlightenment needed or deserved and never had, something like that.
Amen to that. Yeah, she definitely filled in all the holes in the Enlightenment. And if anybody has not read Frederick Douglass's autobiography, it is such a great book. I highly recommend it. It's inspiring. The man was magic with words, conceptually very clean, very clear thinker. I wish old Frederick was around today because I would vote for him for president of the United States.
Yeah, I would absolutely vote for him as well. But, not to take anything away from Frederick Douglass, but there's a whole lot of people I would vote for compared to who's on the ballot these days. But yes, he would be wonderful. I mean, anyone who believed what he believed would be wonderful in today, unimaginable in today's culture, because we've definitely done away with individualism in so many explicit ways that the only individualism we really see, like the only trace we see of Martin Luther King's message about, content of character and all that, is in sort of people's implicit lifestyle, them going to work, them, hiring people on merit or patronizing businesses on merit, and choosing partners in romance, etc., choosing friends, kind of treating people as individuals, treating them according to their character. It's implicit. It's it's a tough thing. It's a tough thing for that to get rid of. Luckily, but without an explicit philosophy, I'm not sure how much longer it'll last.
It's in alignment with reality. That's what makes it self-evident. The self-detonating stuff you really have to work at to rationalize.
Yeah, that's true. And it makes people neurotic too. It makes people miserable, and they make fools of themselves when people are irrational. So, I mean, the best thing about the social justice warriors is that they make fools of themselves and no one wants to be like them. They still gain a lot of influence, sadly, but imagine if they were coherent enough to present themselves as normal human beings. Allison with $10 says, Georgia's oldest city, Savannah, finally put up their first monument up of MLK the other day. It's located at the Plant Riverside district. He deserves it and lived in Atlanta till he graduated college. Well, that's nice. Yeah, I mean, not crazy about public monuments or general. I would like to see all monuments and all property privatized, but yeah, maybe if cities are going to have statues, maybe they should not be statues of generals who tried to secede from the Union. There's my opinion. Then Robert with $5 says, in that case, Allison, we have a mission to save the world culturally/philosophically so that monument isn't torn down 25 years from now. Or maybe why stop there? Maybe privatized and put on eBay or just privatized.
Well, they're messing with statues of Grant, Lincoln, Frederick Douglass. I don't imagine Martin Luther King would be far away.
Oh, yeah, absolutely right. Martin Luther King is canceled in the eyes of the left. I think they generally a lot of kind of BLM types see him as kind of a sellout or just generally someone who was walking too soft and not willing to fight the good fight.
Lincoln has been degraded over the last couple of years.
Yeah, Lincoln, absolutely. I mean, when people first started pulling down statues and vandalizing statues, I think like The Onion or someone put out like a fake headline saying like, George Washington statue, pull down or whatever it was, just or Abraham Lincoln. And of course, within a short amount of time, that satire actually, came true.
Including the statue commissioned by freed slaves in 1876, the statue that Frederick Douglass gave the commemorating address for. There's a lot of controversy over that, and lots of people wanted to tear that down too.
Well, I hate to say it, but by today's standards, the way people today approach these things, those free slaves, they needed today's social justice warriors to educate them. They needed to be explained. Oh, no, your life isn't really yours. I mean, slavery is bad because, it's white, but really liberty is not on the menu for you. No, I mean, really, we're all here to, repent for our inherent sins, the inherent ways which we've sinned and contributed to the patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, individualism is the only way out of this, folks. So choose your friends wisely, I would say. Choose your allies wisely, because we're not really seeing a whole lot of individualism from the right these days. Sorry to bring them up. I know people wish we can get through one episode without me bashing the right, but I mean, watch Yaron Brooks' recent debate with Yoram Chatzoni on the Lex Fridman show. Just came out a couple days ago on YouTube. Yeah, Yoram is quite influential on the right and the way the right has been moving in recent times. And he is no individualist by his own admission.
Watch the feed of popular right wingers on social media too. Candace Owens, Charlie Kirk. Any of these folks. I mean, they say some decent things, but for the most part, it's heavily tainted by awful.
I am at a loss. I have nothing to add. I agree 100%. All right. Coming up at 8 p.m. UK time, it's Reverse Engineering Happiness with Tal Tzfani and Amanda Maxim. Well, there's a nice individualist subject. Jumping back over to the super chat real quick. Allison with $5 says, I agree, Robert, and Savannah is a historical tourist destination. Good luck with privatizing down here, Rucka. It'd be awesome if you could. Well, first comes selfish people, rationally selfish people wanting the best life they can have, and then the political change is comparatively easy to bring about. Okay. 8 o'clock UK time, it's Tal Tzfani and Amanda Maxim. Then at 9 p.m. UK time, it's HBTV with Harry Binswanger. Today's subject is a free will Q&A. So there you go, everybody. You don't think free will is a real thing? Well, make the choice to be there and to ask your question. Then at 10 p.m. UK time, it's Method and Madness. And the subject today is conservative John Doyle hates capitalism. Wow, imagine my shock. A conservative these days hates capitalism. Of course, it's not shocking at all. And Don Watkins will be there, so it's going to be good. All right. I guess we can jump over to Clubhouse. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Mark. Fight the good fight.
Thank you. You too.
Goodbye.
Peace out.